Hey guys, tonight's story isn't about gods or heroes or philosophers. It's not about great thinkers or dazzling temples. It's about someone you've probably never heard of, because history didn't bother writing down their name. And if it did, it spelled it wrong. This is the story of what it meant to be born as a slave in ancient Greece, or more accurately, not really born so much as acquired, like livestock, or pottery, or olives. You didn't arrive in the world with a name, or a birthright, or a future. You arrived with a price tag. And trust me, you are not the high-end model. So before we get comfortable and start imagining golden sunsets over Athens, dim the lights, maybe grab something warm to drink, and remember, the so-called cradle of Western civilization had a lot of people carrying that cradle, and none of them were free. Let's start from the top. Or, for you, the bottom. You weren't born into a home. You were born into a system, and that system saw you as a product, not a person. You might have been the child of a conquered villager or a war orphan, or maybe your parents were poor enough to trade you for grain. Maybe they cried. Maybe they didn't. Doesn't matter. You were gone. Next thing you know, you're stuffed onto a boat with a bunch of other scared kids, and half the cargo smells like fermented fish. You don't speak the language. You don't know where you're going. But everyone's too tired, too sick, or too terrified to cry. And then you dock. Not at paradise, not at safety, but at a port where wealthy men examine you the way we check if avocados are ripe. They poke your arms, check your teeth, lift your tunic, and nod like they're buying a donkey. You're 6 years old, and already you've been reduced to durability. Congratulations. You're now the property of someone who owns 3 houses, 14 goats, and apparently now you. And that's just the start. Your new name? Doesn't matter what your old one was. That's gone now. Wiped out like a chalk mark on a market wall. Now you're Lycos, or Thrata, or just Boy, or you, or whatever your new owner yells loudest when he's angry. There's no paperwork, no ceremony, no welcome dinner, just a cold floor, a mat near the kitchen, and a daily routine that makes death look like a 3-day weekend. You're told when to wake, when to sleep, what to eat, if anything, and what to carry, usually something heavy, fragile, or disgusting. Often all three. Your first job? Cleaning someone else's excrement. Because ancient Greece didn't have flush toilets. It had you. Now, let's talk about how society sees you. You're not a person. You're not a citizen. You are not even legally human in the way that matters. You're property. A walking tool with a heartbeat. And if that heartbeat stops, your owner just buys another one. He won't cry. He won't be fined. He might not even notice. This is a land of theater, art, philosophy. And behind every elegant play performed in the agora, there's someone like you holding a torch, fetching a robe, scrubbing the actor's sandals with a brush made from animal hair and shame. You want freedom? Technically possible. Sure, it's in the rule book somewhere, wedged between how to vote and don't marry your cousin's cousin unless she's rich. But practically, forget it. The odds of a slave in ancient Greece buying or earning freedom were about the same as being struck by lightning while holding a bronze sponge during a drought in a cave. And even if by some miracle you did get freed, you'd still be treated like yesterday's fish. You'd never be equal, never own land, never vote, never matter. Freedom wasn't a finish line. It was just another form of invisibility. Now imagine being a child again. You're growing up in this household, raised by people who own you, taught to call them master or mistress, even when they forget your birthday, which they will, because you don't have one. Birthdays are for people. You're not a person. You're something between a broom and a ghost. So here you are, a teenager now, stronger, faster, more useful, which means more work, more risk. You carry water up hills, build walls that might crush you, tend fields under the sun until your skin blisters and cracks. And then, one day, a philosopher comes to visit. He drinks wine, sits on a cushion, and begins to explain to your master that slavery is natural. that some people are simply born to serve. And you're there, listening, holding a tray of olives, not allowed to speak. He says slaves lack a soul, lack reason, lack value beyond their labor. And everyone nods, even your master, even the other guests. No one looks at you, because they don't see you. So you do your job, quietly. You survive. You sleep next to sacks of grain and a rat you've named Callistos because he's the only creature in the house who doesn't yell at you. You share crumbs. He listens. Sometimes you dream about running away, about sailing home, even though you don't remember where home is. And then you wake up, and the dream fades, because reality smells like sweat and oil and blood. And that's yours, by the way. So why does it suck to be a slave in ancient Greece? Because you never had a chance. Because you were born into a system that erased you before you could write your own name. Because the world built temples to freedom, using the bodies of people who never knew what that word meant. Because you were bought, in bulk, like firewood. And history, it barely noticed. If you're still listening, thank you. If this shook you a little, share it. Like the video. Maybe subscribe, but only if you like history served cold, brutal, and just a little sarcastic. And tell me in the comments, what time is it where you're watching? And what did school not teach you about ancient civilizations? We'll be back next time with another reason why being born in the past was a terrible idea. Until then, stay curious, stay kind, and maybe say Callisto's a little prayer. He's earned it. The thing is, when people talked about you, and they rarely did, they didn't use words like man or woman. They didn't say neighbor or worker. They said property, tool, that one. You were alive, yes, but legally, you were somewhere between a pot and a donkey. You weren't supposed to think. You weren't supposed to feel. You weren't even supposed to be tired. Even when your body begged for sleep or your back screamed from carrying amphory up 3 flights of stone stairs. You were expected to move when told, stop when told, and vanish in between. A perfect servant, seen only when useful, heard only when spoken to, and forgotten completely the second you weren't in the room. And if you ever did speak up, if you asked why, or dared to question, or heaven forbid, said no, then the entire system stopped pretending you were human. You get beaten, sold, maybe even killed, and no one would have to explain it. Not to the neighbors, not to the city, not even to the gods. You see, in Athens, the gods weren't exactly taking your calls. You poured libations to them. You carried their statues in parades. You lit their temple lamps and arranged their flowers. But you didn't get divine attention. You didn't get miracles. You got calluses. And that miracle of democracy, the thing history loves to celebrate, that was happening right over your head while you swept the floor. You weren't just excluded, you were necessary. Democracy needed slaves to function because someone had to make dinner while the voters shouted at each other in the assembly. No votes, no choices, no rest, only expectations. Expectations that you'd endure, that you'd keep your head down, that you'd work through fever, injury, heartbreak, because those things didn't count when you weren't a person. Tools don't get sick days. Hammers don't cry. You didn't own your time. You didn't own your labor. You didn't even own your body. Every scar, every bruise, every blister, all of it was considered someone else's property. And yes, there were laws, but not for your protection. Laws protected your owner's investment. If someone else damaged you, they didn't pay a fine because they hurt you. They paid because they broke something that belonged to another man. So if you were expecting sympathy, forget it. Even your suffering had to go through someone else's approval. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how ordinary it all was. How normalized. You weren't being tortured in some hidden dungeon. You were being overworked and dismissed in broad daylight. In courtyards, in kitchens, in fields, right in front of temples. The same temples people would later call evidence of a great and enlightened civilization. You want to know what you were in that civilization? You were the silence under the marble, the hands that built the greatness, the mouth that never got to speak. And God's help you if you got sick, because there were no doctors for slaves, no ointments, no healing rituals. If you were too weak to work, you were either replaced or left in a corner to recover, or not. Your value was in your output. The moment you couldn't produce, you weren't worth feeding. You know how people talk about burnout now? In ancient Greece, burnout meant being carted to the outskirts of town and left to die. So when people talk about how brilliant the Greeks were, how they gave us science, art, philosophy, just remember who was folding their robes while they invented logic. Remember who was running barefoot across jagged ground with messages. Remember who was pulling stone for their shrines while they worshiped balance and perfection. It was you, and your name wasn't written on any column. No one asked you to smile for the frescoes. You were the shadow in the scene, always there, never seen. And when you died, they didn't even bother lying about it. You were buried in a ditch. No marker, no words, just soil. Because in their world, a tool doesn't need a funeral. It just needs to stop making noise. The word on the street is that ancient Greece invented democracy. That's the tagline, the shiny, noble slogan, the birthplace of freedom, the mother of rights. But here's the thing nobody mentions when they say that with pride. Freedom was for the guys who owned you. Not just any guys. Not poor guys. Not women. Not foreigners. Definitely not you. Democracy wasn't some all-inclusive, open-door policy. It was more like a private club, with a strict dress code, a cover charge, and a bouncer who made sure slaves like you stayed outside, carrying everyone's sandals. You weren't just banned from voting. You weren't even counted. You weren't a citizen. You weren't a resident. You weren't even a line on the census. You were infrastructure. You were the invisible staircase that helped other people reach the podium. The water pitcher passed between debates. The human footnote in a society that never stopped bragging about its ideals. While your master was standing in the assembly, shouting about justice and equality, you were across town, scrubbing olive oil off his sandals, praying he wouldn't come home drunk and philosophical. Because when he got that way, he tried to explain to you why your enslavement was actually logical, natural, divine. Some people are just meant to serve, he'd say, slurring slightly as he ate figs you weren't allowed to touch. And if you looked confused, that was a problem. If you looked angry, that was worse. Because democracy had no room for your feelings. It only had punishments for them. The men who ruled Athens, the thinkers, the voters, the poets, they needed you, but they didn't want to see you. You did their laundry, you cooked their food, you raised their children. But you weren't allowed to speak in public, or testify in court unless tortured first. Yes, really. Because they believed a slave could only tell the truth under pain. That was your role in the justice system, screaming confessions so the jury felt smart. Meanwhile, up on the next hill, the citizens were yelling over each other about laws, about war, about taxes. Most of them were terrible public speakers. Some of them smelled like goats, but they were free. And you? You were hauling the amphory that made their wine-fueled shouting possible. Sometimes, you'd be sent there, not to speak, of course, just to carry a bench, or hold a jug, or fan a politician with a palm leaf while he explained how Athens should expand its empire by conquering more people and enslaving them. Like you, they called it a republic, a city of reason, a model for the future. But you weren't part of that future. You were the background noise. You were the hands behind the curtain, making the show run, but never listed in the credits. And even if your master did something horrible, something criminal, you couldn't testify against him, because your word had no legal weight. You were evidence at best, a breathing object. You weren't trusted with truth unless they beat it out of you. They feared what you knew, so they silenced you. They feared what you'd say, so they made sure no one listened. And they feared what you were, a living contradiction to everything they claimed they believed in. Because democracy is a beautiful idea, but in ancient Greece, it wasn't a promise. It was a performance. And Someone had to build the stage, sweep it, light the torches, wash the robes, suffer in silence. That someone was you. Your job wasn't complicated, at least not by their standards. You had exactly two expectations. Don't collapse and die quietly. Not that anyone said it out loud. They didn't have to. It was baked into every task they gave you. Every glance. Every silence when you were hurting. Every shrug when you bled. You were allowed to ache, but not show it. Allowed to suffer, but not interrupt anyone's day with it. From the moment the sun scraped over the hills, you were up. No alarm. Just the footsteps of someone more important stomping around and expecting breakfast before he finished scratching himself. You chopped wood, fetched water, started fires, cleaned out chamber pots, all before anyone with a name was even awake. Your stomach? Empty. Always. Because you didn't eat first. You ate last. Or not at all. And then came the rest of the day. Labor wasn't the exception. It was your identity. Everything you did was to keep the machine running. Fields, kitchens, markets, laundry, children, animals, repairs, construction, wine pressing, floor scrubbing. And no matter how much you did, it was never enough to be noticed, except when something went wrong. That's when they saw you. That's when the yelling started. That's when hands got heavy and the rod came out, and suddenly the floor you cleaned yesterday is where you're lying today. But hey, don't collapse. You collapse, you're useless. You collapse, and someone else has to pick up your slack, and your owner doesn't like inefficiency. He likes obedience. He likes things tidy and quick. He doesn't want to hear about your fever. He wants to know why the goats weren't milked by noon. And if you die, well, do it quietly. Don't disrupt the household. Don't ruin the mood. Don't make a scene. Preferably, crawl outside first. Somewhere near the olive trees. Somewhere easy to forget. Because no one's writing your eulogy. No one's saving your name in a ledger. No one's telling your story at a banquet. You were a tool, and tools break. That's not a tragedy. That's logistics. You weren't paid. You weren't thanked. You weren't human enough to deserve either. And if you were ever replaced, the next one got the same warning. Don't collapse and die quietly. That was the job. That was the life. And you did it every day, with cracked hands, sunburnt skin, torn sandals, and a silence so deep it buried your voice long before it buried your body. You'd think, after everything, the labor, the silence, the exhaustion, the people who owned you might at least see you as something. Not equal, maybe. Not family. But something real. Someone who suffered. Someone who remembered their own name. Even if nobody else did. But no. Sometimes, the worst thing wasn't the beating or the backbreaking work or the days without food. Sometimes, the worst thing was that your owner was a philosopher. And he didn't even think you had a soul. That's the kind of irony ancient Greece specialized in. The man who owned you, the man you washed, dressed, and served every day, might also be the same man writing books about morality, about justice, about virtue, and somehow, while penning entire essays about what makes a human life meaningful, he never once considered you part of that equation. He'd sit under a fig tree, dictating ideas to a student while you stood beside him, holding a scroll, swatting flies off his wine cup, wiping sweat from his bald head. And he'd say something like, "The soul is the essence of man's reason, his capacity for logos." And you'd blink because you understood those words. You weren't stupid. You weren't mute. You weren't some hollow piece of flesh waiting to be told when to breathe. But he didn't see that. To him, your function, not thought. Body, not mind. Movement, not memory. A talking animal. A useful shadow. And if you ever spoke out of turn, if you said anything clever, or asked a question, or corrected a mistake, he'd frown. Not because you were wrong, but because, in his world, you weren't supposed to be capable of being right. It broke his rules. The same man who could argue, for hours, about whether humans were naturally good, or whether the stars had souls, couldn't bring himself to believe that you might have dreams, or fears, or anything sacred inside you. Some of them, the really educated ones, even wrote it down. Aristotle, that eternal darling of philosophy, literally said slaves were instruments possessed by their masters and only partially capable of virtue. In other words, you were morally incomplete, half a human, a breathing tool with feelings that didn't count. And here's the kicker. Sometimes they taught you to read, not out of kindness, not to liberate you, but because they needed someone to copy manuscripts, run errands, read poetry to guests, or teach their children the alphabet while they drank too much wine and bragged about their intellect. So you'd be sitting there, teaching a boy how to pronounce Homer, syllable by syllable, and your master would walk by and say, "Ah yes, the slave is useful, but like a knife or a horse, not truly rational, not truly rational." And you'd think, what part of me isn't real to you? The hand that holds this book, the voice that recites your favorite lines, the spine I sleep on the floor with, the lungs that carry your wisdom across the room, and the brain that understands every damn word. But he never asked, because he didn't want to know. Because if he knew you were human, it meant everything else. The chains, the orders, the whippings, the ownership would be wrong. So he convinced himself it wasn't. And then he convinced others. And then he became famous for it. They built schools named after him, statues, libraries, entire universities centuries later. People called him the father of reason. All while you, the person who ironed his robes and polished his ink pens, went unnamed in every text. You were part of his story, just not part of his philosophy. And even when you did everything right, learned the lines, followed the rules, kept quiet, worked hard, it didn't change what he saw when he looked at you. He didn't see a soul. He saw obedience, and the world let him. So you kept going. You kept your face still. You translated his thoughts, fetched his books, laughed at his jokes, lit his lamps, and watched as he described what it meant to be human without ever noticing he was standing on top of one. And every night, you lay down in a corner of the floor, listening to him snore like a smug god, wondering if he'd even notice if your soul slipped out of your body and walked away. Probably not, because he never believed it was there to begin with. When night finally came, if it came at all, there was no bedtime. Beds were for citizens, for people with names carved into stone and family histories worth remembering. For you, night was just the time between chores, the part of the day where the orders stopped long enough for you to collapse. You didn't have a room. You didn't even have a real corner. You slept where they let you, if they remembered. Usually, it was wherever you wouldn't be seen in the morning, behind a storeroom, under a staircase, in the shadow of the oven. And if you were lucky, you got a blanket that smelled like mold and old bread. If not, you curled up beside the one thing no one cared enough to steal, a pot of grain. Hard, dusty, cold, but solid. Something that wouldn't yell at you. Something that wouldn't hit. And nearby, always nearby, was Callistos. Not a person, not a friend, just a rat. But he was there, every night. Sharp little claws, black eyes, twitchy nose. At first, you tried to chase him away. Then you stopped, because at some point, you realized he was the only living thing that didn't expect anything from you. Callistos didn't care that you were a slave. He didn't care that you smelled like ash and fear. He didn't ask you to carry things, or speak softly, or clean after him. He just existed, a tiny heartbeat in the silence, chewing the same grain you guarded with your life. The name? You gave it to him. Callistos. The most beautiful. It was a joke, of course. The ugliest creature in Athens. Patchy fur, missing part of his tail, and you gave him a name fit for a demigod. But in the dark, when no one could see, you whispered it anyway. Maybe to remind yourself you still had the power to name something, to recognize something, to matter, even if only to a rodent who didn't mind your shaking hands. Some nights, you even shared crumbs. Not because you had plenty, but because it made you feel human again. feeding something, choosing kindness when the world hadn't offered you any. And then the morning would come. No alarm, just shouting, a door slamming, a pot dropped. You'd wake with a jolt, muscles stiff, eyes gritty, Callisto's already gone. Back into the walls or under the stone. Wherever it was, rats disappeared when the real world woke up. You'd dust yourself off, rub the sleep from your face. Try to forget that you slept next to a sack of barley like it was a pillow. Try to pretend that tonight, maybe tonight, you'd get to sleep a little longer. Somewhere warmer. Somewhere without the gnawing sound of tiny teeth. But you wouldn't, because that wasn't your place. Your place was where no one else wanted to be. And somehow, you were always back there. Next to the grain. Next to the wall. Next to the one creature in Athens who didn't look at you like you were broken. Callistos. Beautiful little rat. Your only roommate. Your only witness. You know the smell of roasted lamb. Rich, fatty, sweet. You know the pop of olives frying in oil. The thick scent of honey melting into barley cakes. You know it well. Not because you've eaten it, but because you've cooked it. Dozens of times. Hundreds. But never once for yourself. You cook feasts. Big, bright, ridiculous feasts. Tables laid out like altars. Roasted birds stuffed with herbs you weren't allowed to touch. Fish glistening with lemon and garlic and pride. Platters of figs and cheeses and meat, so tender your fingers shake just lifting it. And you? You eat air. You taste nothing. Not because there's none left, but because it was never for you. It's not just that you don't get a seed. You don't even get a scrap. You cook on an empty stomach. You work a fire for 5 hours with no water. You wipe your mouth with a sleeve because drooling would be unseemly. Your hands are blistered. Your nose is full of smoke. Your back is sore from lifting clay pots bigger than your head. And you do it all while your master's friends lie around on cushions, debating poetry and sex and war, wiping grease on their tunics and laughing about how full they are. They thank the gods, not you. They raise a toast to Athena, not to the person whose skin is burned from the oven. Sometimes, you get to eat the bones. Not the meat, just the bone, cracked and hollow, sucked dry by a dozen greasy mouths before it ends up in the kitchen basin, like an afterthought. You chew it slowly, not for the taste, because there is none, but because chewing feels like defiance. Because it's something. Because it's yours. You might even get a stale crust of bread, if no one else wants it. And it tastes like glory, like something earned, like survival. And while you chew, alone, in the dark, near the fire that's already gone cold, the laughter continues in the other room. Someone's singing. Someone's vomiting into a potted plant. Someone's asking for more wine. You pour it. You always pour it. You refill their cups with the same hands that haven't held a full one in years. And when they spill it, when they drop a slice of pear on the floor and giggle about it, you clean it up. Without blinking, without snarling, without screaming. Because screaming doesn't change the fact that you know the taste of every dish in that house. Not because you've eaten it, but because you've carried it, stirred it, salted it, sliced it, and served it. And when you're not in the kitchen, you're back there again, in your head, remembering the smell of roasted garlic, wondering if it tastes as warm as it smells, wondering if, in another life, someone ever made something for you. But not in this one. In this one, you don't eat at the feast. You are the reason it happens. And that's all they ever let you be. There's something crueler than chains. Crueler than whips or hunger or exhaustion. It's the part where they hand you a baby, swaddled, soft, wide-eyed, and say, care for this. And you do. You care. You cradle it like it's yours. You rock it through the night. You sing to it softly, even when your throat burns from smoke and silence. You know the baby's rhythms better than its own mother. You know which cry means hunger, and which means a bad dream, and which one means just hold me. Please, hold me a little longer. But it's not your baby. And every time you look at its face, your chest tightens because it could be. You've had babies. Maybe one. Maybe more. You remember how it felt. That flutter in your belly. That kick under your ribs. that strange, aching hope when you first felt life inside you. But you don't remember their names. Because names, for slaves, weren't always written down. You don't know where they are now. Because children born to slaves belong to the owner, not the parent. You gave birth in the dirt behind the house. No midwife, no prayers. You held your child for a day, maybe two, and then someone took them, sold them, or used them, or forgot them, and you went back to work. Because the grief of a slave isn't considered real grief, just a delay in productivity. And now here you are, cradling someone else's child, feeding it, cleaning it, loving it, knowing full well that when this one cries for its mother, it doesn't mean you. Not really. Not in any way that matters. Because one day, they'll teach the child who's who belongs, who doesn't, who matters, who doesn't, and your name, if they even remember it, will become a footnote in their upbringing. Just a servant. It hurts in ways there aren't words for. To know how to soothe a child who isn't yours, when you weren't allowed to soothe your own. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is finally quiet, you stare at the baby and wonder, did someone hold mine like this? Did someone sing to them? Did they cry for me and not understand why I never came? And in those moments, the pain is so loud it fills your whole body. But you don't cry, because crying is dangerous. Crying gets noticed. Crying means weakness, and weakness means punishment. And you've learned the hard way to bury every scream so deep inside you that it dies before it reaches your throat. So you just keep rocking, keep humming, keep being the warmth for someone else's legacy. You teach them to walk, to speak, to laugh. And then one day, just like that, they look at you differently. Not with love, with ownership. They look at you the way their father did. With expectation, with disinterest. They ask you to fetch something. They forget to say thank you. They stop asking to be held. And you realize, you've raised someone who's already forgetting what you are. Not a woman, not a mother, not even a memory. Just a help. You're a nursemaid, but not a parent. You give everything, but nothing is returned. And when you think of your own children, wherever they are, whoever they are now, you pray they were lucky, that someone held them with the care you gave to strangers, that someone saw them as more than a name on a list, that they didn't grow up thinking love is something you have to earn by being useful. But you'll never know, because in ancient Greece, slaves didn't get to keep their children, and they definitely didn't get to mourn them. You clean them. That's one of your jobs. You draw the water. You carry it, bucket by heavy bucket, from the courtyard cistern or the public fountain if they're feeling cheap. Your arms ache. The bucket rims cut into your palms. Sometimes the water sloshes down your tunic and soaks your skin, and no one says, go dry off. They just say, you're dripping. You start with the youngest. The children giggle and splash while you kneel beside the tub, scrubbing their little limbs with soap you'll never use yourself. They complain the water's too hot, too cold, too boring. One of them calls you smelly. You smile, or pretend to, because you can't say what you're thinking, that the only thing between you and clean skin is permission. Then come the adults. That's where the humiliation starts to rot. You bathe your master, or his wife, or both, naked, entitled, lounging like statues with a heartbeat. They hold out their hands, their feet, their backs, and you clean them like they're marble, precious, soft, breakable. They don't thank you. They expect it. They lean into it. They talk over you, as if you're part of the furniture. You hear everything. The gossip, the bragging, the flirting, the arguments about politics and dinner, and whose cousin is marrying whom. And you sit there, soaked, silent, tired, rubbing oils into the skin of someone who would never touch you if you weren't on your knees. Sometimes, they joke about your smell, as if they don't know you haven't had a proper wash in months, as if you choose to stink, as if you aren't the one who preps the baths, lights the fire, tests the water, and still isn't allowed to slip into it when they're done. Because once they've soaked, you empty the tub, pour the water into the drain, wipe the sweat and soap and skin flakes off the tiles, and then you go back to your corner, still dirty, still layered in the grime of work, still smelling like ash and grease and feet. There is no bath for you. If you want to wash, you use cold water behind the stables with a rag and half a prayer. No one catches you doing it. You scrub fast. You don't waste water. You don't leave puddles. Because if they think you're indulging, even for 5 minutes, it's a beating. Or worse, they think clean bodies are earned. Bought. Deserved. And to them, you've earned nothing. Your skin doesn't get to feel soft. Your hair doesn't get combed. Your nails don't get trimmed unless they start to curl or bleed. You smell like labor, like fear, like someone who was never expected to be touched, only used. And yet every day, you touch them. You wipe the dirt from between their toes. You clean their ears, their necks, their armpits. You massage oils into their backs while your own is covered in scabs. You wash the sweat off their thighs while yours stick to the inside of rough linen rags. And all the while, they talk about beauty, about how clean skin reflects a clean soul. And you just listen, because you have to, because arguing with that lie would be suicide, because there's no room in this world for a slave with pride, only one with a sponge and a straight face. So you keep scrubbing. You wash them until they gleam, until they smell like herbs and rosewater and wealth. And you walk away knowing that even their filth, the part you wash off, is cleaner than you're ever allowed to be. You don't love him. Let's be very clear about that. You never did. You never could. You were never given the chance to decide if he was kind, or clever, or cruel. Because by the time he touched you, those questions didn't matter. He was your master. And in ancient Greece, that meant he owned your time, your labor, your body, and your silence. It didn't matter if he had a wife. Most of them did. That didn't stop anything. Because to him, you weren't a person with boundaries. You were convenience. You were privacy. You were the thing he could do behind closed doors without political scandal or a public mistress. You were the loophole. And it always started the same way. A late night. A long look. A request that wasn't phrased like a request. Maybe he'd ask you to pour wine. Maybe he'd ask you to stay after everyone else left. Maybe he'd just grab your arm and not let go. And maybe, just maybe, you didn't fight. Not because you wanted it, but because you knew how that story ends. Because you've seen what happens when a slave says no. It's not like he lied about what it was. He didn't whisper promises. He didn't call it love. He didn't have to, because the moment he reached for you, it was already decided. And your consent was never part of the equation. You became part of his routine. Like dinner, like sleep. He came to you when he was bored, when he was angry, when his wife annoyed him, or his friends bruised his pride. And when he was done, he left. He always left. And if he cried, you did it quietly, into a rag, in the dark, because if his wife heard, it would be your fault, not his. She wouldn't blame the man cheating on her. She'd blame the woman scrubbing her floor and wearing rags. You weren't competition. You were contamination. And still, you had to dress her hair in the morning. Still, you had to hold the basin while she washed her face. Still, you had to kneel at her feet and listen as she complained about her husband's distance, while he touched you the night before and didn't even say your name. And if he got pregnant, that was a different hell, because then you had a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Raise a child who might be taken from you, or lose it, quietly, with herbs or something stronger, handed to you by another slave who'd been through it before. Some women carried the child anyway. Some hoped the master might care. He didn't. The baby might be sold, or hidden, or raised as a servant, but it would never be free, not with a mother like you. Because that child, that's not a miracle. That's a mistake he'd never admit to. You didn't seduce him. You didn't ask for this. You didn't even speak. But history, oh, history, it loves to twist things. It calls you the temptress. It says, slaves often became concubines. As if that's a job title. As if that's a promotion. It wasn't. It was just another form of use. A quieter kind of violence. One that didn't leave bruises on your skin, only on the inside. Where no one looked. Where no one cared. and you learn to live with it. Because in this world, your worth was whatever someone else could take from you. Even the parts that should have been yours alone. You carry the gods. Literally. During festivals, you're the one who lifts the heavy marble image of Athena, or Apollo, or Dionysus, wrapped in fresh cloth, oiled and perfumed, weighed down with garlands that cost more than you've ever touched in coin. You walk barefoot through the streets, part of a parade you're not invited to celebrate. Citizens cheer. They throw petals. They sing. And you keep walking, shoulders burning, back screaming, sweat dripping into your eyes. Because this isn't a blessing. It's a job. They don't ask if your knees hurt. They don't ask if you ate breakfast. They don't ask if you even believe. Because it doesn't matter. You're a slave. And when they need someone to carry the divine, they don't pick priests. They pick bodies. And yours? Yours is strong, quiet, used to pain. Exactly what they want. You've held Zeus over your head longer than most men could last. You felt the cool weight of Hera resting in your arms while the crowd shouted praise to a sky that never opened. And part of you wonders, always wonders, does the god know? Do they see? Do they notice the hands beneath the pedestal? The raw skin, the trembling limbs, the fact that you, a person without freedom, are the one hauling holiness through the dust. But the gods don't answer. They never do. They get feasts, fires, songs. You get the heavy end of a golden pole digging into your shoulder until it bruises black. You get the drunk priest spilling wine down your tunic. You get told to smile while your bones feel like they're splintering inside you. And after the ceremony ends, when the torches go out and the dancers stop, you carry the statue back, carefully, reverently, like it's still watching. And maybe it is, but it's not watching you. Not really. Because if the gods saw you, if they truly saw you, why are you still like this? Why are you the one dragging their image through the dirt while the people who beat you sing hymns? Why are you hungry while the altar overflows with wine, figs, lamb, olives, all things forbidden to your mouth? They say the gods love justice. You've never seen it. They say the gods protect the innocent. You've buried too many of those. They say the gods walk among men, but never in chains, never with your face, never with your scars. So you keep walking, not because you believe, but because you were ordered to. You carry the gods, and they let you. And that silence, that hurts more than the weight. They say you can be freed. That's the myth, isn't it? They tell you that if you work hard enough, behave well enough, survive long enough, you might earn your freedom. They even have a word for it. Manumission. Sounds noble, official, like the gods themselves come down with a scroll and a stamp and say, "Congratulations, you've suffered enough." But that's not how it works. Freedom isn't a door you can walk through. It's a trick of the light, something you glimpse when someone else is holding it up to their face. And yes, technically it's possible. Some slaves get freed. Some save enough money. Not that they're supposed to have any. Some masters feel generous. Not that generosity ever came without strings. Some are released for loyalty, or old age, or because keeping them alive costs more than their usefulness. But here's what they don't say. You can't ask for it. You can't knock on a door and say, "Excuse me, I think I've earned the right to be a person now." You have to wait. Wait and obey, and be lucky enough that your master feels something resembling a conscience. Or maybe just find a new toy to play with. And even if that day comes, even if they stand up in the agora and announce you're free, it's not like the sky cracks open and the sun shines different. Because freedom in ancient Greece doesn't mean equality. You'll never be a citizen. You'll never vote. You'll never own land. You'll never speak in the assembly or be called to jury duty. You'll never marry into a real family, not one with name and title. You'll always be formerly a slave, formerly someone's property, formerly beneath everyone you now walk beside. They don't forget. They don't let you forget. You'll still live in the poor part town, still be expected to show gratitude forever, still be the one they whisper about in the market. That one used to belong to Nicetas the Elder, sold her for a pair of mules. And the cruelest twist, some free people envy you. Because now you compete for work. Because now you charge less. Because you know hunger better than anyone. Because you work harder than them. And they hate that. So you're not accepted by the elite. You're resented by the poor. You're still not safe. And what if you have children? They're not citizens either. They'll grow up on the same edge. Not slaves. Not free. Just less. So no, freedom isn't the end of your story. It's just a new chapter of surviving in a world that never wanted you in it. And most slaves, they never even get that far. They die in kitchens, or in the fields, or in the mines, lungs blackened, bodies broken. They die dreaming of something called freedom, a word they were told existed, but never quite got a hold. You don't own anything. Not your bed, not your clothes, not your name, not the food you eat, not the air you breathe, not even the thoughts you think, because if you say the wrong one out loud, someone else will beat it out of you. And yes, that includes the lice crawling on your scalp. You can feel them sometimes. Little legs skittering through the sweat-soaked roots of your hair. They've made a home there, nesting in your warmth like parasites of a parasite. You try to scratch, to pinch, to crush one between your fingernails. But even that isn't yours. Because technically, you're property. And that means everything on you, in you, around you, is someone else's. The clothes on your back, hand-me-downs from someone who outgrew them. If they rip, you sew. If they smell, you're told to wash them with water you're not allowed to use for yourself. The sandals on your feet, someone else's leather, someone else's choice. If they don't fit, too bad. Walk anyway. You don't own your time. You don't wake up when your body's ready. You wake up when the door slams, or the stick hits the floor, or the master's child cries for you. You don't sleep when you're tired. You sleep when the work is done, if it's ever done. And if you collapse in the middle of the day, that's not exhaustion. That's disobedience. You don't own your labor. You cook, clean, lift, grind, carry, haul, sew, all of it for someone else's gain. They get full. You get a crust. They get warm. You get sore. They get praised. You disappear. Even your body isn't yours. If your master wants to use it, he will. If someone wants to hit it, they can. If someone wants to trade it, in a deal, in a joke, in a drunken gamble, that's legal. Because you're not. You're not legal. You're not real in the way they are. And God's forbid you try to own something. A ring, a blanket, a piece of string you found and tied around your wrist for luck. If it's seen, taken. If it's hidden, punished. Because slaves aren't supposed to have things. You're not supposed to want things. Desire is dangerous when it grows in soil that isn't yours. And yet you do. Because humans are like that. Even when stripped down to the bone, some part of you still whispers, I want something for myself. Maybe it's a wooden spoon you carve in secret. Maybe it's a song you hum when no one's listening. Maybe it's a story in your head you tell yourself every night before sleep. A lie about freedom, about love, about being more than this. That's the most dangerous thing you'll ever try to own. Hope. And that's what they really hate. Not the lice, not the spoon, but the nerve of slave thinking they deserve anything. Even lice. Because if you start believing you deserve even that, what else might you start believing? That you're human? That you're equal? That you're not theirs? And if you believe that, even for a moment, then everything they built on your back starts to crack. So they make sure you know you're not an owner. You are the owned. From the calluses on your hands, to the thoughts in your skull, to the lice crawling through your hair. You don't speak out of turn. You don't roll your eyes. You don't sigh, or groan, or wince too loudly when your back locks up from carrying a load you weren't built for. You keep your face neutral, always, because one wrong look, that's all it takes. Not a punch, not a theft, not a rebellion. A look, that moment when your mask slips, when the corners of your mouth twitch, when your eyes flash with a bit too much humanity. That's the danger, because when you're a slave in ancient Greece, Your body isn't the only thing they try to own. They want your obedience. But more than that, they want your invisibility. They don't want to be reminded that you feel things, that you might hate them, that you're tired, angry, human. So when you forget to hide that flicker in your face, when your mouth curls for half a second, when your eyes say what your words never could, someone notices, and then you're on the ground. It happens fast. A slap, a shove, a fist, maybe a sandal to the side of your head, maybe a stick, maybe worse. Sometimes it's in private, behind a door, down a corridor, in the kitchen, with only the smell of bread and the sound of your breath catching as your head hits the wall. But sometimes it's a show. Because beating a slave publicly, that's a statement. That's a lesson. Not just for you, for everyone watching. The younger slaves, the ones just brought in, the ones who still think they might get away with having opinions. The citizens, the neighbors, the visitors who might be wondering just how much a man can get away with. They don't beat you because of the look. They beat you so you remember the look was a mistake. You're dragged outside, thrown to the dirt. A crowd gathers. People glance. Some turn away. Most don't. Someone, your master, a steward, even another slave forced to play enforcer, lifts the rod. And then the world turns red. There's no trial, no defense. No one asks what you meant by it. No one wonders if maybe your face just twitched from a muscle spasm, or grief, or heat stroke, or nothing at all. They don't need a reason, because you don't get to be misunderstood. You only get to be punished. And when the beating's over, whether it's 5 lashes or 50, you're expected to get up. Not slowly, not pitifully, quickly, quietly, with thanks. Because if you cry, you're weak. If you complain, you're uppity. And if you stay down too long, they think you're planning something. So you stand. You bow your head. You clean the blood yourself. You go back to the task they interrupted with violence, like the beating was just another part of your routine. And it is. Because it can happen again. Tomorrow. Tonight. Next time someone's in a bad mood. Next time someone doesn't like the way you said, "Yes, master." Next time your face forgets that it doesn't belong to you anymore. You're not strong. Not yet. But they'll make you that way. Or you'll break trying. Because you've just been sold to the Lorient silver mines. The real underworld. And no, not the poetic kind with gods and thrones and rivers named Lethe. This is darker, hotter, smaller. You don't get to walk in standing upright. You crawl. The shafts are narrow, no taller than your knees, sometimes tighter than your ribs. The only light is a smoking oil lamp, hanging by a string. The only air is what you drag down in your lungs before you descend. You are not a miner. You are a canary, a breathing, bleeding warning system. If you collapse, someone might yell for help. If not, they'll just pull you out by the feet and throw another slave in after you. That's the rhythm here. Dig, breathe, cough, dig again. Pickaxe. Hands. Pickaxe. Hands. You chip the stone away to reach the veins of silver. Silver that the Athenians used for coins, for statues, for glory. Silver that will never see your hands as money, only as a burn on your fingers, a stain in your lungs. The dust is everywhere. It clings to your tongue. It scratches down your throat like powdered glass. It settles in your lungs like ash, coating every breath in poison. You cough. A lot. At first it's dry, sharp, annoying. Then it turns red. Then it turns quiet, because your body is shutting down. But the mind doesn't care. The mind never cares. You're given barely enough food to survive. You drink warm water when there's any. You piss in a bucket that overflows by morning. You sleep in the tunnels or in huts above ground with 40 other men, all skin and ribs and sunken eyes. And when someone dies, they don't stop the work. They don't even lower their voices. They just drag the body out, dump it near the rocks, and hand the pickaxe to the next boy in line. Because there's always another body, always another slave, always another shipment of fresh, terrified kids from Thrace or Phrygia, or some village you'll never hear of again. Some of them are no older than 10, because small hands can squeeze into tight spaces. Because no one in Athens is thinking about whether those hands belong to children or corpses. And when people talk about how glorious the Parthenon is, when they praise the silver drachma and the strength of the Athenian economy, you know where that strength came from. Your bones, your breath, your bleeding fingernails, your dying friends. The minds of Laurion built democracy. Funny, right? Men stood in the assembly, free, proud, brilliant, and argued about justice. While 100 feet below them, you were choking to death for the metal that paid their philosophers. You don't see the sun. You don't see your family. You don't see the point. And one day, after years of coughing, collapsing, and clawing your way through tunnels that felt like graves, you won't see anything at all. You'll die down there, and no one will write your name, because you didn't have one. You were just another slave in the mine. One more tool that rusted. You're building the Parthenon. Yes, that Parthenon. The temple to Athena. The glory of Athens. The shining white jewel on the Acropolis. The building tourists will one day photograph, centuries after your bones are dust. But right now, it's not a symbol. It's a job site. And you are the labor. You don't get to look at it with awe. You're too busy hauling stone, mixing lime, dragging scaffolds, and grinding your knees into the dust just to keep the thing upright. They say it's being built to honor the gods. But you know the truth. It's being built to honor Athens. To show the world how rich, how powerful, how civilized they are. And that's the part that really stings. Because for every flawless column they erect, they break a dozen backs like yours. You wake up before the sun, not with breakfast, not with song, with shouting, with sore legs, with hands already swollen from yesterday's work. The marble blocks come in from quarries miles away. Each one weighs more than you and 10 of your friends put together. You move them with ropes and rollers in your spine. If one slips, that's not a rescue mission. That's a funeral nobody's paying for. You don't wear sandals anymore. Your feet would slide. You go barefoot. So the dust becomes a second skin, packed into every crack, every cut. You don't bleed red anymore. You bleed white, like powdered stone. There are overseers, citizens, architects. They walk around holding scrolls, arguing about aesthetics. They talk about balance, about proportion, about divine geometry. You nod, not because you understand, but because if you don't nod when spoken to, you might get the back of someone's hand. Sometimes the overseers joke about how beautiful the temple will be, how future generations will marvel at it. And you're standing there, ribs poking through your tunic, holding up a beam that weighs more than your will to live, thinking, I won't see it, because the Parthenon takes decades, years upon years, and you won't last that long. Already, your breathing is thin, your back bows a little more each week. Your fingers have started to tremble. You can feel something failing inside you. Organ, spirit, who knows? You don't ask a healer. You wouldn't be allowed to see one anyway. You hear the gossip. Another worker collapsed behind the south colonnade yesterday. They dragged him out, half conscious, bleeding from the mouth. He was dead by morning. No name, no marker. Just another stone ghost swallowed by the thing he helped create. That's what this place is. Not a monument. A tomb. Not for heroes. For people like you. The ones who mix the mortar and carry the bricks and die so a god can have a view. And when it's finally done, when the columns rise and the marble gleams and the citizens throw a massive feast to celebrate their divine achievement, you won't be there. You'll be gone, buried under the dirt behind the hill, or thrown into a ditch somewhere outside the city wall. No statue. No thanks. No one even knowing you were part of it. And yet your fingerprints are still there. On every slab, every stair, every inch of the temple that people will one day call perfect. A perfection bought with your life. You're educated. That's supposed to be a good thing, right? It's rare for a slave. Special even. You can read. You can write. You've memorized poems by Sappho and Homer. You can recite them on command, like a trained bird with better diction. You know your letters, your numbers, the names of every god in the pantheon. You even know some philosophy, which is ironic, considering most philosophers think you don't have a soul. So yes, you're educated, but not for your benefit. Never for your benefit. You were taught to read, so you could read his letters. Out loud, in the corner, while he lounges on a cushion and eats grapes someone else peeled for him. And the letters? They're love letters. Romantic, poetic, long-winded, and full of words like passion and eternity. You get to read every line of them. To women you've never met. To men he shouldn't be writing to lovers who wouldn't recognize you if you tripped over their sandal in the street. You read while he sighs and nods and edits you in real time. Slower there, he says. Put more emotion into that line. Try again, but this time, imagine you're in love. In love. You're standing there holding a stained scroll written in someone else's name. Whispering sweet nothings from a man who once kicked you across a courtyard because his soup was cold. You're not in love. You're in service. Sometimes you catch yourself pausing at certain words. Devotion, yearning, forever, and your throat clenches. Not because you feel them, but because you'll never hear them spoken to you. Those words, they belong to free people, to the ones who get courted, who get written about, not the ones doing the reading. And when the reply comes, you read that too, and you write back, his words, your hand, your fingers aching from hours of careful script, pressing ink into parchment like it matters. You know all the secrets, all the little dramas. You're the ghost in the room of every forbidden tryst. You're the silent third in every romantic triangle. You're the only one who knows both sides of the story, and the only one who doesn't get to be in it. And if the letter includes something cruel, a rejection, a mocking joke, a sentence that cuts like a blade, you read that too, with no expression, no reaction, because your face is not yours. It's a surface they use. And if you flinch, if you smile, if you betray even an ounce of opinion, you're overstepping. So you become a mirror, reflecting every emotion that isn't yours, speaking every thought that isn't yours, telling every story that isn't about you. And when the scroll is done, when the last flourish is sealed with wax and you're dismissed, you go back to your corner. You wash ink from your fingers. You try not to remember the poetry. You try not to think about what it means that you, the educated one, the one who understands all the words, is still nothing more than a pen. A smart pen. A literate pen. A pen that never gets to write its own name. You're at the edge of the room. Back straight. Eyes low. Feet bare. Hands full. A clay jug in one hand. A towel in the other. Wine stains your fingers. Heat clings to your neck. The floor is sticky with spilled honey and crushed figs. Welcome to the symposium. Ancient Greece's idea of an elite night out. A boys' club of philosophers, poets, generals, and politicians reclining on couches like overfed gods, talking about honor, war, beauty, and eventually you. But first you pour. Cup after cup. Always full, always careful, never too fast. Because spilling on a citizen could get you slapped, or kicked, or dragged out by the collar and whipped behind a courtyard wall. They're not just drinking wine. They're drinking status. And you're the proof of theirs. More wine, slave, says one. You step forward. He doesn't look at you when he speaks. He doesn't have to. You're not the guest. You're the prop. And when they start talking about politics, they don't lower their voices. Not when they talk about how to improve Athens. Not when they talk about who deserves freedom. Not even when they talk about how funny it is that you can't vote. That's the joke, see? You're right there. You can hear every word. You might even understand it better than half the men talking. But you can't say anything. And when the jokes start, real jokes, cruel jokes, it's always the same. They point to you and say, look at this one. Probably dreams of running for office. Or, I'd free him, but who'd clean the floor? Or the classic, he's got strong legs, but he'd make a fine hoplite if we gave him a name. And they laugh, not because it's funny, but because they can. And You stand there. Smile if you're smart. Laugh along, maybe, because not laughing might look like defiance. And defiance gets remembered. And you don't want to be remembered. The best thing you can be in this room is invisible, efficient, quiet, grateful, a shadow that brings wine and vanishes before the punchline lands. Sometimes they joke about selling you, sometimes about what you're worth. He's clever, could fetch 3 money. Sometimes they joke about your looks, your body, what they'd do with you if their wives weren't home. And it's not just men. Some nights, women are allowed too. Hitara, courtesans trained to charm. They laugh at the jokes too, because they're just like you in some ways. Owned, decorated, replaceable. You refill their cups. You pick up the fruit they knock over. You wipe up the vomit when someone drinks too much and forgets they're supposed to be civilized. And when the music starts and someone plays the lyre and the candles burn low, when the air fills with smoke and sweat and perfume, you're still there. Not as a guest, not as a person, as the reminder that all of this, the power, the ideas, the debates about ethics and virtue and truth, are built on your back. You, who will never be invited to speak. You, who will never be asked your name. You, who they'll never write about, unless it's in a joke. And centuries from now, when historians write about the brilliance of the symposium, they'll quote the thinkers. They'll analyze the wine. They'll marvel at the discussions of justice and morality. And they'll forget the one holding the cup. So, you're done waiting for kindness. You've had enough of the beatings, the jokes, the looks. You've memorized the schedule. You know which guards drink too much. You know which door squeaks and which one doesn't. You've even stolen a little bread, hidden a water skin under your tunic, and tonight, maybe this is it. You don't want justice. You just want to breathe without permission. So you run. And for a moment, it feels like the world might actually be turning in your favor. You're moving fast. No one's shouting. No one's chasing. The road ahead is wide and dark and empty. But then, you realize you don't know where the hell you are. You've never seen a map. You can't ask for directions. You don't even know the name of the town your master dragged you to last spring. You've been in Athens for years, maybe, or Thebes, or Delphi. But that doesn't mean you know Athens. You know your master's house, the market, the path to the well. But the rest, it might as well be the moon. You can't read the street signs, if there are any. You don't know which road leads to freedom and which leads right back to another slave block. And the people you pass, they're not allies. Every citizen has the legal right to stop a runaway. And if they catch you, they get a reward. So every person you see is a potential bounty hunter. Every shepherd might be the one who drags you by the ear back to your owner. Every merchant might recognize the branded mark on your arm and shout for the city guards. And those guards, they don't ask questions. They chain first, beat second, ask never. Some slaves try to make it to the border of the city. Some try to sneak onto ships. Some head for the mountains, thinking they can live like hermits, eating berries and hiding in caves. But you don't even know which way the mountains are. And even if you make it that far, what then? You're still a runaway slave in a world built on slavery. Your accent gives you away. Your clothes give you away. Your sunken eyes, your cautious walk, your silence, they all give you away. And if you do somehow survive the wilds, you'll just end up in another town, another house, another name shouted at you from across a courtyard. Because that's the real joke. You can escape a person, maybe even a city, but you can't escape a system that's everywhere. And ancient Greece, it's one big open-air trap. Polished marble, glorious statues, and behind it all, people like you, running in circles with no exits. So eventually, the road runs out. Your legs give out, or someone catches up, and you're dragged back. No words, no trial, just new chains. A brand across your face this time, so no one ever mistakes you for anything but what you are. Property that try to pretend it could walk free. You're lying on a wooden table, not because you're sick, not because you asked for help, but because someone with a scroll and a lot of opinions wants to see how your body works. From the inside, his name is probably something grand. Hippocrates, Erasistratus, Herophilus. Maybe you've heard it whispered, great minds, they say, bringers of science. But tonight, you are his experiment. You're not allowed to scream, because screaming would imply you feel something. And if you feel something, then maybe you have a soul. And if you have a soul, well, that would ruin everything. Because this whole operation depends on one idea. You're not a person. You are a vessel, a collection of meat and bones, existing solely so someone else can figure out what's inside you without the mess of empathy. And so they cut. They cut while you're still alive. Because dead bodies go stiff. Dead hearts don't beat. Dead lungs don't fill. But yours still work. For now. So they open you. They call it vivisection, a fancy word that means we're going to slice you open and watch what happens, and you don't get a say in it. They start slow. A cut here, a peel there, fingers pushing aside muscle, pulling back skin, marveling at what lies beneath. Fascinating, someone says, while you struggle to stay conscious. Your pain is their lesson. Your panic is just part of the procedure. They might be trying to learn something noble. How the heart pumps, how the brain connects to the spine, how disease takes hold. But none of that makes it better for you. Because you don't get healed. You don't get thanked. You don't get remembered. You get torn apart. And even if they don't cut you open, there are other ways they experiment. They test poisons on you. They rub strange herbs into your wounds. They feed you things to see what kills faster, the fever or the fungus. And when you collapse, when your eyes roll back, your chest stops rising, they jot down a note, a new theory, a cleaner fact, and then they walk away, because your body was never yours. It was borrowed from them, for their curiosity, and what they learned from you. That gets written into the textbooks, passed down for centuries. They'll call it brilliance, progress, civilization. They won't mention your name. They never knew it anyway. They'll just say, early anatomical studies conducted on lower subjects. Or, slave material yielded useful results. Useful. You were useful. You died useful. And that's the highest honor you'll get. Here's how it goes. The court gathers. The crowd is loud. The air hot. And the men in robes are already half bored. The accused is pacing. The accuser is sweating. The stakes are high. Someone might lose property, reputation, their life. And someone says, bring in the slave. He saw it. That's you. You're dragged in, not walked, not invited, dragged. And right in the middle of the trial, you're tied down. Because no slave testimony is accepted unless it's extracted under torture. Yes, you heard that right. If they just asked you, calmly, kindly like a person, no one would believe you. Because you're a slave. And slaves lie. That's the logic. But if you're screaming the words, bleeding the truth, now that must be honest. Because why would anyone lie while being tortured? If that question makes you angry, congratulations. You're already more ethical than ancient law. So they bind your wrists, clamp your legs, and out comes the whip, the rod, the branding iron, whatever it takes. They ask you questions, and hit you when you answer, and hit you when you don't. They want names, dates, confessions. Not from you. You're not the one on trial, but you're the one who bleeds for it. And if you say what they want to hear, they keep hitting you, just to make sure. And if you don't, they say you're hiding something. So you're stuck. If you tell the truth, they might not believe it. If you lie, they might execute the wrong man. And either way, you'll be carried out of the courtroom, not walked. Sometimes they beat you until you faint. Sometimes until you die. And when it's over, when a verdict is read and the citizens pat themselves on the back for delivering justice, you're thrown outside like broken furniture. No thank you. No apology. Just scars. And the bitter knowledge that truth doesn't matter when it comes from a slave. It only matters when it's forced. They say the gods are always watching, that they see into men's hearts, that they reward virtue and punish wickedness. Unless, of course, you're the one lighting the incense. Then, they just ignore you. Because in the world of temples and rituals and sacred festivals, you're not a believer. You're a prop, a tool in the pageant, a warm body used to hold a platter of olives, sweep the floor before the procession, and scrub the blood off the altar when it's over. You don't get to pray. At least, not out loud. Your gods are survival and silence. You carry offerings you can't afford to give. You roast meat you'll never eat. You help dress the priestess in embroidered robes while your own tunic hasn't been washed in 3 weeks. And when the citizens dance and sing and call upon Zeus, Athena, or Dionysus, you stand in the shadows with your head bowed. Because if you look too long at their statue, they think you're being disrespectful. Or worse, presumptuous. Because the gods belong to them. Even in prayer, you're a foreigner. They'll let you touch the tools of worship. As long as it's your job. They'll let you carry the god's image in a festival. As long as you don't forget your place. And if the god is carried high through the city in a great golden cart, your job is to push it. Your back, your sweat, your calloused hands, keeping the holy thing moving. But no one thanks you. They thank the gods. Because in the story they tell, the gods gave them power. The gods gave them Athens. The gods gave them you. And if you ever get caught offering a prayer of your own, they laugh, or punish, or remind you that whatever divine being you think might be listening isn't. You're not chosen. You're not sacred. You are not part of the story. You're just holding the candle while someone else writes it. And when the ceremony ends and the crowd disperses and the priest lays down his heavy robes, you're the one who cleans the ashes, who wipes the sacrificial blood off the marble, who puts the sacred objects back into storage until the next holy day. The sacred becomes the dirty, and that dirty job always lands on you. You go to bed smelling like burnt fat and someone else's incense. And maybe you whisper a prayer anyway. Not to Zeus, not to Apollo, not to any god who lives in carved stone and polished gold, but to anyone, anything that might see you, remember you, hear you. Because if there's a god for slaves, he's not worshipped in daylight. He's the one who walks beside you in silence, the one who listens when no one else does, the one who doesn't need your offering, because he already knows you've given everything. Maybe it happens in anger. Your master's had a bad day. He lost a bet. He's hung over. His wife embarrassed him at dinner. You spilled wine on his sandal. You looked at him the wrong way. You didn't move fast enough. So he hits you. And then he keeps hitting. And suddenly, you're not breathing. That's it. No trial. No court. No jury appears. Just a body cooling on the floor while someone fetches more wine. And the law, Greek law, it technically frowns on excessive cruelty. But excessive is a moving target when the victim is property. If a master kills his slave, he might be fined. He might be told not to do it again. But more often, nothing happens. Because it's not murder if the thing you killed wasn't a person. And that's the key, isn't it? You're not a citizen. You're not even a full human in their eyes. You're a possession, a living tool, a warm appliance that talks. And when a tool breaks, no one writes a eulogy. They throw it out. Sometimes it's worse. Sometimes they plan to kill you. Maybe as punishment. Something public, dramatic, meant to teach other slaves to stay in line. You might be stoned, whipped to death, even crucified. Yes, crucifixion. Long before Rome made it famous. Greeks had it too. They'll tie your arms wide, strip your clothes, and leave you under the sun until you beg for death. And when you die, that's the lesson. Not to you. You're already gone. To the others. Your final act is to become a warning. And the citizens walk by. Some avert their eyes. Some laugh. Some don't look at all. Because in Athens, in Corinth, in Delphi or Sparta, you don't have a name that matters. You don't have a family that can file a complaint. You don't have rights. You're not buried with a marker. You're dumped in a ditch, burned in a pit, forgotten like a bad dream. And no one writes your story. Because it's not a tragedy when a tool breaks. It's not injustice when the law doesn't see you. It's just life. Greek life. The same society that gave us philosophy, our democracy, also gave us a world where you could die screaming. And they keep playing the liar in the next room. That's when the mask comes off. That's when your body becomes a public stage. They don't beat you in secret. That would defeat the point. Punishment is theater. And you're the star performer in a show about power. It might start with a rope. They'll tie your hands behind your back, haul you into the courtyard, maybe even to the middle of the street. And suddenly, people are watching. Neighbors, strangers, children, men sipping wine on a shaded porch, women with baskets full of olives, pausing mid-step. Everyone sees you now. You, who served quietly for years, who went unnoticed through hundreds of dinners and errands and sunrise chores. Now, you're the center of attention. Now, they can't look away. Because punishment in ancient Greece wasn't just correction, it was performance. They want people to hear the whip crack. They want them to see the blood, the bruises, the broken look in your eyes. They want the message to be loud and clear. This is what happens when a tool forgets it's a tool. Sometimes it's the lash. Sometimes it's a club. Sometimes it's a punishment designed for spectacle, like parading you through the streets with a sign around your neck, announcing your crime. Spoke without permission. Stole a figure. Looked his master in the eye. And a crowd? They might laugh. They might pity. But no one stops it. Because you're not being punished for what you did. You're being punished to remind them who you are. A thing. A body. A warning. And when it's over, when you're limp and trembling and thrown into a corner to heal or die or both, you're invisible again. They won't remember the name they never bothered to learn. They won't ask if you're still breathing. They'll step around you. They'll forget the sound of your cries by dinner. Because in this world, being seen is a privilege, and pain is the only language they let you speak. First of all, you're still not a citizen. That right? Reserved for men born free to Athenian parents, with a family line as polished as the marble temples they build. You can't vote. You can't own land. You can't hold office. You can't marry a citizen woman without special permission. And even then, good luck convincing her father. Oh, and remember the name your master used to shout across the yard? That's still yours. You don't get your old name back. You probably don't even have an old name. Now, you're just X, the freedman of Y. Like a dog with a new leash. Just longer. And socially, you're somewhere between suspicious and invisible. The citizens don't trust you. They say things like, slaves shouldn't get ideas. Or, today he's free, tomorrow he thinks he's one of us. Your old master might still expect favors, calls and debts, invites you to dinner, but not as a guest. You're the success story he wheels out for praise. Look at this one. Used to serve wine. Now he runs errands and owns a mule. You're free, but always branded. Not on your skin, but in their eyes. And God's help you if you speak out of turn. Say something too clever in the agora. They'll remind you where you came from. Try to start a business that actually makes money. Suddenly, people want to check your papers. Try to dress too well. Now you're uppity, arrogant, forgetting your place. And worst of all, you might start to forget it too. You might walk through the city with your head up. You might feel proud, even until someone shoves you, calls you slave-born, and suddenly you're back in your body again. Back in the space between freedom and personhood. Because that's what being a freed slave in ancient Greece really is. A waiting room with no door. You're not in chains, but you're not invited to the table either. And when you die, there might be a gravestone, a little one. It might say freedman of Nicaeas or faithful servant, honored in freedom. But it won't say what you wanted it to. Because that kind of legacy is reserved for the men who never had to earn their names. See, being from Athens doesn't mean anything unless you meet the criteria. You could be born here. Your entire life could happen inside its walls. You could know every corner, every sin of the agora, every crack in the temple columns. You could speak flawless Attic Greek, understand every local god, even recite a play or two from memory. But if you weren't born free, if your parents weren't both citizens, if your bloodline doesn't trace neatly back to a pile of honored bones and well-documented ancestors, you are a resident, not a participant. It's like standing outside a banquet hall, listening to laughter through the marble walls, while your hands are still raw from carrying the food inside. You are in Athens, but you're not of Athens. You're never invited to vote. You don't sit in the assembly. You don't get a say in what laws govern you, but you do get punished by them. You don't go to war for glory. You get sent to war as meat. And if you do something extraordinary, build something, invent something, save someone, it doesn't change anything. The most you'll get is a nod, a pat on the head. Maybe your master boasts about you, as if your talent is another fine piece of property he owns. My slave makes better shoes than anyone, he might say. My slave tells such clever jokes. But if you walk into a public space with pride, if you forget yourself and speak too freely, laugh too loudly, ask too many questions, suddenly you're a threat, an embarrassment, a slave pretending to be someone. They'll shut you down fast. Know your place, they'll mutter. Even if you're free, even if you've served 20 years and your master's dead and the law technically calls you liberated, because the stain never fades. The social stink of having once been owned clings to your skin, invisible but unmistakable. And if you try to love someone above your rank, forget it. No Athenian father is letting his daughter marry someone who used to carry buckets. You might start your own little business, open a workshop. You might even save enough to buy someone else's freedom. But it doesn't matter. To the city, you are tolerated, useful, convenient, but never fully welcome. And when people look back on this place, this cradle of civilization, they won't think about you. They'll think about Socrates and Pericles and those glorious marble steps. They'll say, "Ah yes, Athens, a city of thinkers and freedom." They won't mention the people who kept it clean, who built it, who kept it alive while others stood on soapboxes and talked about justice. You could shout your name in the middle of the street, but in Athens, only a citizen's voice echoes. See, being from Athens doesn't mean anything unless you meet the criteria. You could be born here. Your entire life could happen inside its walls. You could know every corner, every sin of the agora, every crack in the temple columns. You could speak flawless Attic Greek, understand every local god, even recite a play or two from memory. But if you weren't born free, if your parents weren't both citizens, if your bloodline doesn't trace neatly back to a pile of honored bones and well-documented ancestors, you are a resident, not a participant. It's like standing outside a banquet hall, listening to laughter through the marble walls, while your hands are still raw from carrying the food inside. You are in Athens, but you're not of Athens. You're never invited to vote. You don't sit in the assembly. You don't get a say in what laws govern you, but you do get punished by them. You don't go to war for glory. You get sent to war as meat. And if you do something extraordinary, build something, invent something, save someone, it doesn't change anything. The most you'll get is a nod, a pat on the head. Maybe your master boasts about you, as if your talent is another fine piece of property he owns. My slave makes better shoes than anyone, he might say. My slave tells such clever jokes. But if you walk into a public space with pride, if you forget yourself and speak too freely, laugh too loudly, ask too many questions, suddenly you're a threat, an embarrassment, a slave pretending to be someone. They'll shut you down fast. Know your place, they'll mutter. Even if you're free, even if you've served 20 years and your master's dead and the law technically calls you liberated, because the stain never fades. The social stink of having once been owned clings to your skin, invisible but unmistakable. And if you try to love someone above your rank, forget it. No Athenian father is letting his daughter marry someone who used to carry buckets. You might start your own little business, open a workshop. You might even save enough to buy someone else's freedom. But it doesn't matter. To the city, you were tolerated, useful, convenient, but never fully welcome. And when people look back on this place, this cradle of civilization, they won't think about you. They'll think about Socrates and Pericles and those glorious marble steps. They'll say, "Ah yes, Athens, a city of thinkers and freedom." They won't mention the people who kept it clean, who built it, who kept it alive while others stood on soapboxes and talked about justice. You could shout your name in the middle of the street, but in Athens, only a citizen's voice echoes. There's no funeral procession, no marble slab carved with heroic lines, no priest offering coins for the underworld fairy. You don't get a pyre. You don't get mourning. You don't get remembered. You collapse where you fall. Maybe it's in the field, with a sack of grain still strapped to your back. Maybe in the mines, choking on silver dust, lungs caving in like rotten wood. Maybe in some cramped, airless room while your master's children scream next door. Or on the street, stabbed, beaten, or just worn down after years of trying to survive without being seen. And when you die, they don't clean you. They don't wrap you. They don't tell stories about who you were. They throw your body into a pit outside the city. A slave grave. No names. Just a pile of bones under a thin layer of dirt. If you're lucky, someone covers your face. If not, the sun dries your skin while the birds do the rest. No one tells your story, because no one thinks you had one. And while you lie there, fading into the soil, the world keeps moving. Your master might replace you by the next market day. The city's still debating politics. The gods are still being paraded through the streets. And centuries later, when people talk about the glory of Greece, they won't picture the ditch. They'll picture the temples, the philosophers, the democracy that never once thought to include you. They'll talk about the greatness of the West, about how Athens gave birth to civilization, how the Greeks valued reason and justice. They won't say a word about the thousands of broken bodies buried just outside the gates, the ones who made it all possible, the ones who never got a name. You were born in silence. You lived under orders. And now you vanish, unnamed, unmarked, unmourned. That's it. That's your legacy. Not carved in stone, but rotting in the ditch behind it. You built the temple. You hauled the marble. You polished the columns that still gleam under the sun 2,000 years later. You cooked their meals. You raised their children. You warmed their beds. You died in their minds, bled in their fields, and faded behind their glory. And for all that, you get nothing. No eulogy, no legacy, no myths, no records, not even a rumor. You were there, but history doesn't say so. You spoke, but no one wrote it down. You felt, you feared, you hoped, but to the world, it's like you never existed. And that's not an accident. It's design, because history loves a winner. It worships names like Pericles and Socrates and Plato, men who stood on stages and spoke of virtue and justice while someone like you held the curtain. They get statues, plinths, poetry. You get erased. Every time someone says, Western civilization began in Greece, you're not part of that sentence, even though your hands built it, even though your back broke under it. And maybe that's the cruelest part. Not the work, not the pain, not the chains or the whips or the fear, but the silence, the total, deliberate forgetting, because your life didn't fit the narrative. It was inconvenient, ugly, necessary, but not noble. So they buried it, and in its place, they put a clean, white statue, a hero in stone, a man who never lifted anything heavier than a scroll. People walk by that statue today and say, wow, the Greeks were brilliant, and maybe they were. But brilliance doesn't shine unless someone's polishing the gold. And that someone was you. And here we are, centuries later. All the blood has dried. The ditches have vanished beneath highways and marble museums. The mines are silent. The statues are polished. And the tour guides smile as they say the phrase that makes historians weep and politicians puff up their chests. Welcome to the birthplace of Western civilization. They say it with pride, with wonder, with a reverent sigh, like they're standing in a cathedral built not of stone, but of ideals. Democracy, philosophy, theater, law, art. Athens, they say, gave us all this. But what they don't say, what they never say, is that Athens didn't just give us those things. It cost someone everything. Because for every man writing a tragedy, there was another man cleaning the amphitheater after him. For every philosopher walking through the agora, there was a slave trailing silently behind, holding the scrolls. For every marble temple, every sacred altar, every golden statue, there were 100 nameless people hauling blocks in the sun, choking on dust, eating scraps, and dying quietly in the corners of the world that didn't make it into the history books. But we don't put that on postcards. We say, civilization began here, and we forget who was left out of it, because civilization, as we like to tell it, was never for everyone. Not the women, not the foreigners, and definitely not the slaves. And Athens, glorious, gleaming Athens, made sure of that. The democracy they invented, it was never meant for you. The justice they celebrated, it came after torture. The freedom they cherished, it sat on the backs of the people who weren't free. And that's the twisted brilliance of it. They built a world so beautiful, so seductive, that even centuries later we want to believe it was for all of us. But it wasn't. It was for the few, the male, the landowning, the citizen. And now, thousands of years later, we still echo their words. We still study their texts. We still hang their busts in libraries and quote them in debates. And we still call it the beginning. But beginnings built on the silence of others, they come with a debt. So tonight, as the lights dim and your mind drifts back from the ancient world to the present, remember that history isn't just the loudest voices. It's the quietest graves, the ones without names, without stones, without stories until now. So yes, this was the birthplace of Western civilization, but it was also a graveyard, a machine, a lie told in marble and half-truths. And if you carry anything from this journey, let it be this. Civilization isn't measured by what it builds. It's measured by who it leaves behind. Good night, and thank you for listening to the ones who never got a statue.